big news on yesterday, was the fact that Canada has been given 30 days, essentially, at least 30 days, it's been described, as relief from any sort of application of these 25% tariffs on Canadian goods going into the United States. There was two calls by Prime Minister Trudeau and President Trump yesterday, and the news came late in the day. Good news for Canada, but is it a win? Our next guest will shed some light on it from an agriculture perspective. We're joined by the executive director at the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, better known as CAFTA. It is Michael Harvey. Michael, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me back, Sean.
Okay, so is it a win? Is this a win for Canada?
It's a reprieve. It's a lot better than how things were during the weekend, Sean.
Okay, so I know from my talking to people and reading some of the U.S. news, the U.S. is definitely viewing it as a win, especially on the southern border. A lot of Canadians are pointing out, hey, these are things that we said we were going to do a month ago. I have a federal government press release back in December them saying this $1.3 billion. Does any of that matter in this?
That's hard to say, Sean. Really, it's very difficult to understand precisely the motives of the U.S. administration right now, and I think the role of a group like CAFTA is to try to bring back the discussion to rational trade policy. And rational trade policy is that for United States producers and consumers, as for Canadian producers and consumers, it is a bad idea to build up tariff barriers. The good thing is to tear down tariff barriers.
We've heard a lot of talk from President Trump and those around him on the trade file, a lot of talk about this structural change, bringing manufacturing back to the United States. A lot of times that was in reference to China. But one of the examples that is often given is, like, for example, Canadian auto manufacturing. There's also a real thread here on taking some of the agri-processing, meat packers and the meat production, or canola processing, or a crush facility, taking that back to North Dakota instead of having it in Manitoba. How worried are you about the potential structural change the U.S. is trying to execute here?
Well, the first thing I say is yes, I'm worried. But then very quickly, I think when you're working through these things as a professional, you have to take that back to what can we do to face a situation that worries us? And what can we do right now is to work as closely as possible with U.S. counterparts, with U.S. producers, to help them understand how bad a decision like this would be for them, how the North American trading environment is good for them, is good for the United States, is good for United States producers, is good for United States consumers, and through the American political process, get back to a position of more realistic trade policy.
As you look across your membership, there's a lot of different commodities. Canada very reliant on trade with the United States, but also with sending goods and products around the world. Very trade reliant. Are there certain pieces of the membership that maybe is more exposed to this trade war or this trade war battle and this tariff talk than some of the others?
Well, I'd say everyone is because the United States is our biggest market, but also what is really interesting about the North American trading environment is that we produce things together, that we have these integrated supply chains, as you mentioned. So where things would be tremendously problematic would be to start unraveling some of those supply chains. So if you look at meat, where the live animal spends part of its life on one side of the border, part of its life on the other side of the border. If you look at feeds that go across the border, if you look at processed food, which is again made on both sides of the border, I mean, we really have a deeply integrated economy, and becoming less integrated would make the United States and Canada poorer.
Yeah. Because why? What ultimately happens in that scenario?
It would make everything less efficient. I mean, I think Canada's great strategic decision when we signed the free trade agreement with the United States, what's that, 30 years ago now? And then NAFTA after that was that we moved towards a system where you do the economically rational thing. You get the lower cost input, you sell where you can get the best price, And the market means that the most efficient things take place. And if the most efficient things take place, then the producer will get more and the consumer will pay less, right? Moving away from that increases the cost for everybody.
Yeah. Michael, what in the next 30 days, what is an example of something that, your organization, your membership is doing to use this 30, even though what was negotiated here was mainly about the border, drugs and immigration, we know that some of the other issues are not going away. So what are you doing in this next 30 days?
So we have members who are speaking to American counterparts, again, to try to get these messages across in the United States. It's interesting. The United States political environment has been one over the last couple of weeks where business people are very concerned about speaking up in public in a way that is perceived as opposing President Trump. That makes sense. The election just took place. The president is new. He's in his period of strongest strength. He has a negotiating style, which is such that if you speak up against him, there can be consequences to that. But I've noticed in the last few days, people peeking their head up over the ledge and saying some things. The American Farm Bureau spoke up, saying that there are negative effects to tariffs. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce spoke up, saying there's negative effects to tariffs. The market spoke up yesterday. It wasn't great for the TSX, but it was a bad day for NASDAQ and the Dow Jones as well. And everybody says, I don't like prescribing motives to people, but everyone says that President Trump sees the stock market as one of his key performance indicators. And everything would indicate that the market doesn't like it when people are talking about tariffs. And I think we're seeing it again today with the Chinese response to the tariffs on them.
Wouldn't, what you just said, I don't disagree with any of it. Where it leads me to though, doesn't that showcase in the meantime the weakness of our traditional Team Canada approach? In the renegotiation of NAFTA to create the CUSMA and USMCA agreement, Canada worked hard at the state level, also in DC, talking to members of Congress, trying to push the narrative that free trade was good for not only Canada but also for the U.S. Are some of our U.S. friends on free trade going to be as willing to speak up, at least in public, for the benefits of free trade at this moment, or are we relying totally on backroom discussions from some of those people?
So, Sean, I've been doing this kind of work, lobbying, government relations, negotiations in complex environments for around 30 years now. And you always have to regularly look at the strategic environment, try to figure out what the interests are of the people you're dealing with, try to figure out exactly where the decision-making process is. And you need to revisit that every now and again to adjust. It's obvious that right now we're adjusting. We're maybe adjusting on the fly. Um, and that's fine. So let's adjust on the fly and figure out who has influence on President Trump, figure out what is affecting President Trump's decision-making process today, and then concentrate on that. But there's lots of different things, right? There's people, there are interest groups. I mentioned the market, that's rational economic decision making. There's different things that influence the president, and yes, we have to concentrate on those things. It's obvious that we have to get in to MAGA land, as everybody says, or Trump land, however you want to call it, and get to those people. We also have to understand that things will change a bit over time. I mean, the U.S. political process is constant election mode, right? They're going to have midterms in 2 years. People are fundraising all the time. You constantly have to see what the president is reacting to. And let's be clear, it's good not to be too emotional about it because President Trump has a communication style which can sort of lead you down a lot of rabbit holes that aren't really worth it. Let's be calm, manage things rationally, and respond rationally.
When I appeared on Ag Day yesterday in the U.S. on Monday morning, I was asked by Tyne Morgan, what was the best case scenario for Canada? And what I leading, into this decision D-Day, these, a couple conversations between the president and the prime minister. And I had said, maybe Canada agreeing to an early renegotiation of USMCA so that it could maybe be wrapped up before the midterms would maybe that's the best case. It seemed like yesterday was a better case, at least in the short term. How willing do you think Canada is going to be to agree to an early renegotiation potentially that President Trump seems to be pushing for?
I don't think early negotiation is a very problematic thing. I mean, negotiation means talking, and we're always willing to talk. Really, the question is the terms of the negotiation. If moving negotiation forward means that we come to an agreement and then attention shifts to other things, I think that's fine. Dates aren't really the issue. The issue is what we come to as an agreement. If President Trump wants to renegotiate the agreement, treaties are always open to renegotiation, is the reality.
Yeah. And keeping open dialogue, in some ways, it kind of, you could also look at kind of buys Canada time. Is that how you would look at that process?
Talking is not a very costly thing. I think it's important to be talking all the time, whether the talking is within a structured renegotiation process or just constant discussion. That's great. I found it very interesting. The Mexican president, her response was a little bit different than Prime Minister Trudeau's. She didn't put tariffs on right away in retaliation. She went to suggesting working groups. I think working groups are a good approach. In any case, we're going to have to talk this through.
Yeah.
The structure of how we talk things through is secondary.
Did CAFTA have a position? Because it's interesting. On Sunday, listening to a lot of pundits, very critical. There were some people inside Canada critical of Canada's aggressive approach. That we had kind of missed the point of all of this. Mexico was taking a different position, as you just laid out. At the end of the day, we both ended up in the same place, at least on the surface. Did CAFTA have a position on Canada's response to the threats by President Trump?
So CAFTA's position has been that we're going to keep beating the drum for fair and open trade. We believe in a world with fewer trade barriers. We believe in a world with more open trade. And we're not going to get into the constant details of how to manage things on a daily basis. I think it's a bit of a trap for us in an environment that, let's face it, more and more is going through Twitter, is going through people reacting to other people's tweets and then them reacting to their tweets. That's not the world for CAFTA. That's a world for political actors. I find that world exhausting, to be honest. And I don't think it's very strategic for an organization like CAFTA. We've been broadly supportive of the government's approach, but we're not going to micromanage the approach and respond to every element of it.
Great stuff. Hey, Michael, really appreciate your insight and your perspective here. And I'm sure we have lots to talk about going forward here in the coming weeks and months. So thank you so much.
Looking forward, Sean, anytime.